Welcome back. Let's recap the top stories now. Fresh fighting broke out in the Tunisian capital between security forces and demonstrators. The violence comes as Mohamed Ghannouchi announced he'll step down as prime minister. Two Iranian opposition leaders under unofficial house arrest since February have reportedly been abducted. A human rights group says Mehdi Karoubi and 2009 presidential candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi are in grave danger. The UN has unanimously voted to impose immediate sanctions on the Libyan regime. It comes as anti-Gaddafi protesters close in on the capital, Tripoli. But the Libyan leader is defiant, saying he won't leave. Well, back to Libya now and the advance of opposition forces there. As more cities come under their control, the ring around Muammar al-Gaddafi appears to be tightening. So just what are the options for the embattled Libyan leader? Lawrence Lee reports.
So what next for Gaddafi? Assuming he will not go voluntarily, his next moves must surely be predicated on where he believes he still has support and to what extent he can block his opponents from marching against him. A look at Western Libya presents problems for both the opposition fighters and for Gaddafi. The coastal road from the east is blocked at Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, which he still controls. It's not a big place, but the roads either side of it are said to be controlled by armed forces loyal to Gaddafi. As such, it presents the biggest obstacle to forces from the east moving on Tripoli. Yet west of Sirte and still east of Tripoli, the rebels are said to now hold Misurata. The town has been the scene of days of heavy fighting, with the city falling and then being counter-attacked by pro-Gaddafi forces. But he now seems to have lost the army and therefore the town. Just as significant is the town of Zawiya, just west of Tripoli. Geographically, it's crucial. Latest reports from the town of 200,000 say after days of heavy fighting, the rebels are in charge in the centre, but the pro-Gaddafi forces are surrounding it. It's hardly surprising Gaddafi wants it back. If the rebels do keep control, it would leave Tripoli in a pincer. So what of the situation in the capital? The most recent images from foreign media invited by the Gaddafis suggest hasty attempts to clean up the centre and an area around Gaddafi's stronghold still said to be under his control. But contrary to Gaddafi's claims, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Tripoli is not stable, and some reports have suggested dozens killed in clashes. Scenes from some of the poor suburbs like Tajoura in eastern Tripoli seem to suggest the police have simply melted away. It all lends weight to reports from Tripoli that Gaddafi's forces have been trying to pay local men to take up arms against the insurgency. There's no question the ground upon which Gaddafi built his empire is slipping away. His military options look increasingly limited. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Well, officials in Egypt unveiled the first proposed political reforms since the revolution. While they allowed new political parties, restrictions on the participation of the Muslim Brotherhood have not been lifted. Anita McNaught reports now from Cairo.
As emotions subside on Tahrir Square, the business of making change happen for all Egyptians has begun. The Egyptian constitution perpetuated the country's draconian emergency laws and consolidated power in the hands of the former president. This committee of legal experts was tasked by Egypt's temporary rulers, the military, with proposing reforms to 6 articles. They tackled 11. But one controversial paragraph remains untouched, Article 5, that prohibits parties with religious affiliations from standing in elections. One of the committee members is with the Muslim Brotherhood, the party most affected by this exclusion. Far from being concerned about the omission, he believes it was too contentious for them to touch.
It's a flawed article, but we didn't want to amend any article that had an ideological dimension. We're leaving that to an elected committee.
But political analyst Gamel Sultan doesn't think this law will pose an obstacle to the Muslim Brotherhood in the future.
It is not about the text itself. It's about the context within which this text is going to be interpreted. And I think the current and the future context will be much more tolerant vis-à-vis the Muslim Brotherhood.
Egypt's popular revolution threw up a new generation of progressive political activists, the hope of a vibrant and reinvigorated country, a break with the past. But critics of these first tentative steps say the march to new elections is going too fast, with these new players not given the time to form parties. And they warn the constitutional reforms don't go far enough. They don't secure a place for the new voices. They may even entrench the old ones.
This is a system that is likely to create or to allow a bigger chance for the Muslim Brothers plus the NDP to dominate the new parliament. It looks like some sort of a deal is there, a sort of a deal at the expense at the new, modern, secular, social and political forces.
The people of Egypt are impatient for change. If they find 6 months down the track that the revolution has merely delivered a new version of the old order, some of these people are going to be seriously disappointed. Anita McNaught, AlJazeera, in Tahrir Square, Cairo.
Well, earlier I spoke with Tamer Mustafa, a professor of international relations at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. Well, he said there's still a long way to go to bring democracy to Egypt.
Well, I don't know that there was a democratic process that was on track, but this is a beginning. Article 76, the proposed amendment to Article 76 of the Constitution, really does open up, for the first time, probably a genuine multi-candidate presidential election. The threshold for entry and for candidacy is much easier to achieve, and so we will probably see a multi-candidate election. Additionally, the proposed amendment to Article 88 guarantees full judicial supervision of elections. That's another good change that was made, that is being proposed. And finally, Article 148 of the Constitution, which governs the emergency law, now will make it more difficult for the regime to impose an emergency rule, at least on paper.
All right, granted, those are the pluses.
These are
what do you
positive
make
changes.
of some of the alleged minuses that the NDP, National Democratic Party, which used to run the country, would still be left with perhaps too much influence in organising the vote? There's not enough constitutional guarantees that foreign and independent monitors will be allowed to operate. What do you make of criticisms like that?
I think that's an excellent point. You know, one of the points of caution that I've been sort of urging is that constitutional changes are absolutely essential, but there is a whole lot of illiberal legislation that still is on the books that deals with the nitty-gritty of organizing elections and giving powers to the Ministry of Interior and so on and so forth. Those laws need to be changed, and there needs to be enabling legislation that will assist in the process, that will guarantee real free and fair elections.
Well, the cost of last week's devastating earthquake in New Zealand is being counted. The leader of the country puts the figure in the order of $15 billion. Well, at least 148 people were killed in last week's quake in Christchurch. 50 more are still unaccounted for. The dead and missing include people from 20 nations. Funerals begin on Monday. In Chile, thousands of people gathered to mark 1 year since a massive earthquake struck the country. Thousands of families are still living in temporary shelters. President Sebastián Pinera has been facing growing criticism over the speed of the reconstruction. Al Jazeera's Mark Orchard reports.
A pre-dawn vigil at the epicenter of the magnitude 8.8 earthquake. The keynote to a national day of mourning for all the victims and their families. In the coastal town of Constitución, bells tolled and the names of the dead were read out.
To be here along with all the other families is incredibly painful. Incredible, but you need to know how to stand up.
President Sebastián Pinera has been touring the disaster zone with the message that his government is sparing no expense to rebuild.
As we observe the first anniversary of the catastrophe which struck our country, the reconstruction has been solid, and we have achieved very significant progress and accomplishments.
The country's main highways are nearly back to what they were before the quake. But building new housing for the displaced has been slower. In this camp, residents who lost all their possessions are still waiting for a grant to build a new neighborhood.
We are suffering here. We don't have water for the house. The truth is that there's been a lot of shamelessness here. That's the only way to describe it. We are all suffering from depression here. This is going nowhere.
Opposition politicians blame the lack of progress on the right-of-centre government's decision to privatise most of the construction work.
The government cannot continue to accept poor workmanship in the service of the public. The methods they have been employing in the Bio region are absolutely outside the law and public morality.
Pinera concedes that the work is running behind schedule, but his government says it will accelerate the outsourcing of work to private companies. Mark Orchard, Al Jazeera.
Heavy rains caused a hillside to collapse in Bolivia's capital, destroying 150 homes. Residents in the La Paz neighborhood began evacuating on Saturday. There were no casualties. According to officials, 44 people have been killed in recent weeks by flooding and mudslides. Let's move to Malaysia now, where the government is planning to tighten media regulations. They'll put limits on the internet as well, raising concerns of a crackdown on free speech. Stephanie Scowen reports.
It's the kind of news no publisher wants to hear. A planned newspaper boycott in support of free speech in Malaysia. Campaigners say if the plan to change the Printing Presses and Publications Act and the Sedition Act goes ahead, it will shackle the last vestige of press freedom in the country.
Free press in this country, I mean, the idea of free press is most of us don't feel there is such a thing as free press in that sense.
The editor of independent news portal Malaysia Kini, which is frequently critical of the government, fears the worst.
When the guidelines been set, when the confusion has been sorted out, I see, perhaps a major crackdown against online, commentators, including, websites like Malaysia Kini.
Malaysia Kini is one of the few media outlets to take up the case of journalist Hatta Wahari. A reporter for government-backed paper Utusan Malaysia, Wahari was suspended in January for comments he made as president of the NUJ.
I'm issuing a statement that please go back to the press freedom, please do a non-biased reporting and non-partisan, that we go back to our main objective, to disseminate information to the people. We should not be a propaganda tool to any stakeholder.
Some fear the expansion of the PPPA and the Sedition Act is part of a government strategy to win back seats at the next election. Others warn a crackdown will stifle Malaysia's development and say the government needs to change tack.
If Malaysia wants to be a developed nation, it comes with democratic rights and freedom of expression. You can have a high-income economy and restrict the others.
Al Jazeera asked Utusan Malaysia to explain why it was taking action against Wahari, but the paper declined to comment. Disciplinary proceedings against him have been indefinitely postponed, but Wahari remains suspended from his job. The plan to regulate the internet is a major U-turn for the government, which previously said it would never interfere with the World Wide Web. It says, though, it must now respond to threats to national security. But just exactly what those threats are, critics say, is anyone's guess. Stephanie Scowen, Al Jazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
Well, the 83rd Annual Academy Awards ceremony is almost over in Hollywood. Only the Best Picture award remains to be announced. Natalie Portman was awarded Best Actress for her gripping role in Black Swan. And Colin Firth won the Best Actor award for his portrayal of King George VI in The King's Speech. Well, that film won 2 other awards, Best Original Screenplay and Best Director. This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making the headlines now. Foreign ministers of the world's major powers are converging on Geneva to discuss what to do about Libya. It comes as anti-Gaddafi protesters close in on the capital, Tripoli, but the Libyan leader is defiant, saying he will not leave. Reports from western Libya say troops loyal to Gaddafi are preparing for a counter-offensive in the city of Zawiya. The city centre's currently in the hands of anti-Gaddafi forces. We're also getting reports the country's second most important military